The knock on my door came at midnight. A stranger stood there, holding my dead father's watch. The same watch that was buried with him 6 months ago. My heart stopped. My hands went numb, because there was no way this man should have that watch. It was on my father's wrist when we closed the casket. I saw it myself. "How do you have that?" I whispered, staring at the silver watch gleaming in the porch light. The stranger looked at me with tired, sad eyes. "Your father gave it to me," he said quietly, "3 days before he died, and he made me promise to return it to you when the time was right." "That's impossible," I said. "That watch was buried with him."
The stranger shook his head slowly. "No, son, it wasn't. Your family buried him with a replica, because the real watch, it held a secret your father didn't want to take to his grave." My blood ran cold. "What secret?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The stranger took a deep breath. "The secret that changes everything you think you know about who your father really was. Let me tell you about the night a stranger appeared at my door and shattered my entire world." My father was a simple man. He worked at the same factory for 30 years, came home every night at 5:30 p.m. sharp, ate dinner with us, watched the evening news, went to bed by 9, every single day, like clockwork. The only thing he owned that had any value was his watch, a vintage silver Omega from the 1960s. He wore it every single day of his life, never took it off, not to shower, not to sleep, not even when he was dying in that hospital bed. "This watch," he'd say, turning it on his wrist, "is the most important thing I own." I never understood why. It was just a watch, old, scratched. The band was worn and faded, but to him, it was everything. When he died of cancer 6 months ago, my mother insisted we bury him with it. "He'd want it with him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He never took it off, not once in 40 years. So we did. I watched them close the casket with that watch still on his wrist, the second hand still ticking away the seconds like it was counting down to something only he knew about. And then we buried him. Life moved on the way it does after someone dies. Slowly, painfully. We cleaned out his things, sorted through his clothes, donated what we could, kept what mattered. But something felt wrong, incomplete, like there was a piece of the puzzle missing that I couldn't quite see. My father had been distant those last few weeks before he died. Not cold, just somewhere else. Like his mind was 1,000 miles away, even when he was sitting right next to me. "Dad, are you okay?" I'd ask. "Fine, son, just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was something else, something heavier. I thought maybe it was the cancer, the pain, the knowledge that his time was running out. But now, looking back, I realize it was more than that. He was carrying a secret so big, so heavy, that even dying couldn't make him let it go. My mother noticed it too. "Your father's been acting strange," she'd say, "secretive. He keeps making phone calls and stepping outside, won't tell me who he's talking to." "Maybe it's just the medicine," I'd say, trying to comfort her. But deep down, I wondered. And then he died. And I thought whatever he was hiding died with him. Until that knock at midnight. Until that stranger showed up at my door holding the one thing that should have been 6 feet underground. My father's watch. watch. I stared at the watch in the stranger's hand, my mind racing. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. And how did you get that watch? The man was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and weathered skin. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, nothing remarkable. But his eyes held a sadness that felt ancient. "My name is Marcus," he said softly, "and I was your father's friend, his closest friend, actually, though you never knew I existed." "That's impossible," I said. "My father didn't have any close friends. He went to work and came home. That was his life." Marcus smiled sadly. "That's what he wanted you to think." I felt anger rising in my chest. "Look, I don't know who you are or what kind of game you're playing, but that watch was buried with my father. I saw it. We all saw it." "You saw a replica," Marcus said calmly. "Your father had a copy made 2 weeks before he died. Same model, same scratches, same worn band, identical in every way. He switched them out the night before the funeral." "Why would he do that?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because the real watch holds something he couldn't take to his grave," Marcus said, "and he made me promise to give it to you when you were ready." "Ready for what?" Marcus held out the watch. "To know the truth about who your father really was." I didn't take it. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly. "What truth?" I whispered. Marcus sighed. "Can I come in? This isn't a conversation for a doorstep." Every instinct told me to slam the door, to call the police, to protect myself from whatever this stranger was about to tell me. But something in his eyes, something genuine and sad and honest, made me step aside. He walked into my living room and sat down on the couch, still holding the watch. I stood by the door, arms crossed, defensive. "Your father," Marcus began, "lived 2 lives." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means the man you knew, the factory worker, the quiet husband, the simple father, that was only half of who he was." "And the other half?" I asked, my voice tight. Marcus turned the watch over in his hands. "The other half was a hero." I blinked. "A hero?" "Yes," Marcus said. "For 30 years, your father worked at that factory during the day, but 3 nights a week, he volunteered at a shelter downtown. He fed the homeless, counseled addicts, saved lives." I shook my head. "No, that's not possible. He was home every night. We ate dinner together. I would have known." "He told you he worked late sometimes, didn't he? Overtime shifts?" My throat tightened. "Yeah, but only a few times a month." "Those weren't overtime shifts," Marcus said. "Those were the nights he came to the shelter, the nights he spent helping people who had no one else." I felt dizzy. Why wouldn't he tell us? Why would he hide that? Marcus smiled sadly. "Because your father was humble. He didn't do it for recognition or praise. He did it because it was right, and he didn't want his family to worry or feel like he was neglecting you." And, Marcus continued, "he didn't want you to know about the people he was helping. Didn't want you to see the darkness in the world. He wanted to protect you from it." Tears burned in my eyes. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with the watch?" Marcus held it up. "This watch was given to him by someone he saved, a young man named Daniel. Daniel was an addict, living on the streets. Your father found him one night, bleeding and broken, and brought him to the shelter. Spent months helping him get clean, helping him rebuild his life." Marcus paused, his voice thick with emotion.
Daniel died 2 years ago, but before he did, he gave your father this watch. It was the only thing of value he owned, a family heirloom, and he wanted your father to have it as a thank you for saving his life." I wiped my eyes. "So the watch my dad always wore wasn't his originally," Marcus finished. "It was a gift, a symbol of the lives he touched, the people he saved." "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "Why did he keep it secret?" "Because he was dying," Marcus said quietly, "and he knew if you found out about his volunteer work, you'd ask questions. You'd want to know why he spent so much time away from home, and he didn't want you to feel guilty or angry or abandoned." "But I wouldn't have."
He also didn't want you to feel obligated to continue his work, Marcus said. He wanted you to live your own life, make your own choices, not live in his shadow. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. So he made a replica and took the secret to his grave? Not quite, Marcus said. He made me promise to give you the real watch after he was gone, after you'd had time to grieve, after you were ready to hear the truth. But why? I asked, looking up at him. Why tell me now? Why not just let him keep his secret? Marcus stood and walked over to me, holding out the watch. Because your father wanted you to know who he really was, not the quiet man who came home every night, but the man who spent 30 years changing lives in the shadows. He placed the watch in my hand. It was heavier than I expected, warm, like it still held a piece of my father's warmth. And, Marcus added softly, because there's something inside the watch, something he wanted you to find. My heart pounded. Inside? Marcus nodded. Open the back. With trembling fingers, I turned the watch over and found the small clasp. I pried it open. Inside, taped to the back cover, was a small folded piece of paper. My father's handwriting. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Messy, slanted, the same handwriting that used to sign my report cards and birthday cards and notes in my lunchbox when I was a kid. To my son. If you're reading this, it means Marcus kept his promise, and it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I kept this part of my life from you. I know you probably feel hurt or confused or even angry. You have every right to be. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. When I was 25 years old, before you were born, I was lost. I was working dead-end jobs, drinking too much, angry at the world. I had nothing and no one. Then one night, a stranger helped me, fed me, listened to me, showed me kindness when I deserved none. That stranger saved my life. And I promised myself that if I ever got back on my feet, I'd do the same for someone else. So when I met your mother, when I got the factory job, when you were born, I knew I had to keep that promise. 3 nights a week for 30 years, I went to the shelter. I fed people. I listened to them. I showed them the same kindness that stranger showed me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to see the darkness I was walking through. I wanted you to believe the world was safe and good. But now that I'm gone, I want you to know the truth. I want you to know that your father wasn't just a factory worker. He was someone who tried to make the world a little less dark. This watch was given to me by a young man I helped. He's gone now too, but this watch represents every life I touched,
every person I helped, every promise I kept. And now I'm giving it to you. Not because I want you to continue my work, but because I want you to know that you can make a difference too, in your own way, on your own terms. The world is full of darkness, son, but it's also full of light. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I hope this watch reminds you that you come from a line of people who care, who help, who love, even when no one's watching. Love always, Dad. I couldn't see through my tears. The paper shook in my hands. My chest felt like it was being crushed. Marcus sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "He loved you so much," he said quietly. "Everything he did was to protect you, to give you a better life." "I thought I knew him," I choked out. "I thought he was just ordinary." "He was extraordinary," Marcus said. "He just didn't want anyone to know it." I wiped my face, staring at the watch in my hand. All those years, I'd seen him wear it every single day. I'd asked him why it mattered so much, and he'd always just smiled and said, "It reminds me of what's important."
Now I understood. It reminded him of the lives he saved, the promises he kept, the person he chose to be when no one was looking. "Tell me about him," I said to Marcus. "Tell me about the man I didn't know." Marcus smiled. "Where do I start?" For the next 2 hours, he told me stories. Stories I'd never heard. Stories that made me laugh and cry and see my father in a completely different light. He told me about the time my father stayed up all night with the suicidal teenager, talking him through the darkness until the sun came up. He told me about the woman my father helped escape an abusive relationship, finding her a safe place to stay and helping her get back on her feet. He told me about the elderly veteran my father visited every week, sitting with him, listening to his stories, making sure he never felt alone. He told me about Daniel, the young addict who gave my father the watch. How my father had found him bleeding in an alley and carried him to the hospital on his back. How he'd visited him every day during rehab. How he'd helped him find a job and an apartment and a reason to keep living. "Daniel used to say your father was the reason he didn't give up," Marcus said. "He said your father saw him as a person, not a problem, and that made all the difference." Tears streamed down my face. "I wish I'd known." "He didn't want you to know," Marcus said gently. "He wanted to protect you from the pain and darkness he saw every day. He wanted you to have a normal childhood, a happy life." "But I could have helped," I said. "I could have been there with him." "You were helping," Marcus said, "by being his son, by giving him a reason to come home every night, by reminding him what he was fighting for." I looked down at the watch, at the scratched glass, at the worn leather band, at the second hand still ticking away, counting down moments that my father would never see. "He wanted you to have this," Marcus said, "because he wanted you to know that your life mattered, that the choices you make matter, that kindness matters." "I don't know if I can live up to that," I whispered. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. "You don't have to. You just have to be you. Your father didn't help people because he wanted to be a hero. He did it because it was right, and he did it quietly, without recognition, because that's who he was."
"But what do I do now?" I asked. "How do I honor this? How do I honor him?" Marcus stood and walked to the door. "You live, you love, you help when you can. You be kind when the world is cruel. That's all he wanted." He paused at the door and turned back to me. "And one more thing." "What?" "He wanted you to know that you made him proud every single day, not because of what you accomplished or who you became, but because you were his son. And that was enough. Marcus left, and I sat alone in my living room, holding my father's watch, crying for the man I thought I knew and the hero I never knew existed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch holding the watch, reading my father's letter over and over until I had it memorized. As the sun came up, I made a decision. I called my mom. "Hello?" she answered, her voice groggy. "Mom, did you know?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Know what, honey?" "About Dad, about the shelter, about the people he helped." Another pause. Then quietly, "Yes, I knew." My throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he asked me not to," she said, her voice breaking. "He made me promise. He said it was his private mission, his way of giving back, and he didn't want you or anyone else to feel like they had to do the same." "But Mom, he was a good man," she interrupted, crying now. "The best man I ever knew, and he didn't need recognition or praise. He just needed to know he was making a difference." "I wish I'd known," I whispered. "I know, sweetheart," she said, "but maybe it's better you know now that you're old enough to understand what it meant." We talked for another hour. She told me things I'd never known. About how my father would come home exhausted but smiling. About how he'd tell her stories about the people he helped without ever using their real names. About how he'd cry sometimes, overwhelmed by the pain he saw, but never stop going back. He said it was the most important work he'd ever done, Mom said. More important than the factory, more important than anything. But not more important than us, I said. No, she agreed. You and I were always first. But this work, it fed his soul. It made him feel like his life had purpose beyond just surviving. After we hung up, I sat with the watch, thinking about everything I'd learned. My father wasn't who I thought he was. He was more, so much more. And I'd spent my whole life seeing only half of him. That afternoon, I drove to the shelter, the one Marcus had mentioned, the one my father had volunteered at for 30 years. It was a small building in a rough part of town, weathered, worn, but clean and welcoming. I walked inside, and a woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about my father," I said. "Thomas Parker. He used to volunteer here." Her face lit up. "Tommy! Oh my goodness! You're Tommy's son!" I nodded, my throat tight. She came around the desk and hugged me. "Your father was a legend here. Everyone loved him. We were devastated when he passed." I didn't know he volunteered here," I admitted. "I just found out last night." She pulled back, her eyes kind. "That sounds like Tommy. He never wanted the spotlight. He just wanted to help." She showed me around, showed me the kitchen where my father had served meals, the counseling room where he'd talked to people struggling with addiction, the small library he'd helped build, filled with donated books. "He changed so many lives," she said. "We have people who come back years later just to say thank you, just to tell us that Tommy saved them." Tears filled my eyes. I wish I'd known." "You know now," she said gently, "and that's what matters." Before I left, she gave me a framed photo from the wall, a group shot from 5 years ago. My father stood in the back row, smiling, surrounded by volunteers and the people they'd helped. He looked happy, truly, deeply happy. I took the photo home and placed it on my mantle next to the watch. That night, I called Marcus. "Thank you," I said, "for keeping your promise, for telling me the truth. Your father made me promise, Marcus said, and I loved him too much to break it. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't he want me to know while he was alive? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because he was afraid you'd see him differently. He didn't want to be a hero in your eyes. He just wanted to be your dad. But he was both, I said. Yes, Marcus agreed. He was. Over the next few weeks, I started volunteering at the shelter. Not because I felt obligated, not because I was trying to live up to my father's legacy, but because I wanted to understand. I wanted to see what he saw, feel what he felt, experience the work that had given his life so much meaning. And I did. I met people who were broken and hurting and desperate, people who'd lost everything, people who'd given up on themselves. And I helped them, fed them, listened to them, showed them the same kindness my father had shown so many others. It was hard, exhausting, heartbreaking, but it was also beautiful because I saw what my father had seen, that everyone deserves kindness, everyone deserves a second chance, everyone deserves to be seen as a person, not a problem. One night, an older man came in, homeless, hungry, ashamed. I gave him a meal and sat with him while he ate. Thank you, he said quietly. He reminded me of someone who used to volunteer here, a man named Tommy. My heart stopped. Tommy was my father. The man's eyes filled with tears. Your father saved my life 10 years ago, helped me get clean, helped me find a job. I fell back into hard times recently, but I never forgot what he did for me. He would want you to know you're not alone, I said, my voice thick with emotion. The man nodded. He used to say that. Every time I felt like giving up, he'd say, "You're not alone, and tomorrow is always another chance." I smiled through my tears. That sounds like him. When I got home that night, I held my father's watch and felt closer to him than I ever had when he was alive. Because now I understood. I understood why the watch mattered, why the work mattered, why keeping it secret mattered. It wasn't about recognition. It was about love. Pure, selfless, quiet love. The kind of love that doesn't need applause or awards. The kind that just shows up day after day, helping people no one else sees. It's been 6 months since Marcus showed up at my door with my father's watch. 6 months since I learned that the man I thought I knew was actually someone far greater than I'd ever imagined. And in those 6 months, I've learned something important, something that's changed the way I see the world and the way I live my life. We spend so much time trying to be seen, trying to be recognized, trying to prove our worth to others. But the most important work we'll ever do is the work no one sees. My father spent 30 years helping people in secret, saving lives in the shadows, making a difference without ever asking for credit. And he did it because he understood something most of us forget, that true goodness doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need social media posts or thank you cards or award ceremonies. It just needs to happen. Quietly, consistently, without expectation of return. That's the lesson my father taught me, not through words but through action, through a lifetime of choices no one knew about until he was gone. And now, wearing his watch every day, I'm reminded of that lesson constantly. I'm reminded that kindness matters, that small acts of compassion can change lives, that the work we do when no one's watching is the work that defines who we really are. I think about all the times I judged my father for being simple, for being ordinary, for living a small, quiet life. But his life wasn't small. It was huge, massive, filled with impact I never saw because I was looking at the wrong things. I was looking at his job, his house, his routine. But I should have been looking at his heart. And his heart was enormous, big enough to hold the pain of strangers, big enough to care about people society had forgotten, big enough to sacrifice his own comfort and free time to make sure others didn't feel alone. That's not ordinary. That's extraordinary. I've also learned that secrets aren't always bad. My father kept his volunteer work secret not because he was ashamed, but because he was humble. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want praise. He didn't want his family to feel guilty or obligated. He just wanted to do the right thing, quietly, without fanfare. And there's something beautiful about that. In a world where everyone's posting every good deed online, where kindness is often performative and self-serving, my father's quiet generosity feels like a breath of fresh air. He didn't help people for likes or followers or validation. He helped them because they needed help, and he could give it. Simple as that. Now I volunteer at the shelter 3 nights a week, the same nights my father used to go. I don't post about it online. I don't tell people unless they ask directly. I do it because it matters, because it's right, because I see my father's legacy in every person I help. Last week, a young woman came in. She was pregnant and homeless and terrified. I sat with her, listened to her story, helped her find resources, connected her with people who could help her get back on her feet. As she was leaving, she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." And I understood then what my father must have felt all those years. That moment when you realize you've made someone feel less alone, less forgotten, less invisible. It's not about saving the world. It's about helping one person at a time, one meal, one conversation, one act of kindness. My father did that for 30 years. Thousands of meals, thousands of conversations, thousands of lives touched. And no one knew except the people he helped. That's legacy. Real, lasting legacy. Not money or status or fame, but lives changed, hope restored, dignity given back to people who thought they'd lost it forever. I also learned that you never truly know someone until they're gone. I lived with my father for 18 years. I thought I knew everything about him, but I didn't know the most important thing. I didn't know his heart. His mission, his purpose. And now that I do, I wish I could go back and tell him how proud I am, how much I respect him, how much I wish I'd asked more questions, paid more attention, looked deeper. But I can't. He's gone. All I have is this watch, this letter, and the stories of the people whose lives he changed. And I suppose that's enough. Because through them, I'm getting to know my father in a way I never could when he was alive. I'm seeing him through the eyes of the people he helped. And in their eyes, he wasn't just my dad. He was a hero, a savior, a light in their darkest moments. That's who Thomas Parker really was. Not a factory worker. Not a simple man. A hero who chose to work in the shadows because he believed that's where heroes were needed most. So here's what I want you to take from my story.
Look closer at the people around you. Ask questions. Pay attention to the things they don't say, the time they can't account for, the secret smiles they wear. Because everyone has hidden depths. Everyone has a story you don't know. Everyone is fighting battles and doing good works you will never see. Don't wait until they're gone to discover who they really were. And more importantly, don't wait for recognition to do good in the world. Help someone. Feed someone. Listen to someone. Not because it'll get you likes or praise or validation, but because it's right, because it matters, because someone out there needs exactly what you have to give. My father didn't change the world, but he changed the world for hundreds of people who needed him. And in the end, isn't that the same thing? I wear his watch every day now. Feel its weight on my wrist, hear it ticking away the seconds. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded of 3 things. Time is precious. Don't waste it on things that don't matter. Kindness is powerful. Even small acts can change lives. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you give away while you're here. My father gave away 30 years of kindness, 30 years of compassion, 30 years of his life to people who couldn't repay him. And now, through this watch and the story, his legacy lives on. Not in monuments or awards, but in the lives of people he helped, and in me, his son, who finally understands what it means to be a good man. A good man isn't the loudest or the richest or the most successful. A good man is the one who helps when no one's watching, who loves without expecting anything in return, who makes the world a little less dark, one person at a time. That was my father, and that's who I want to be.
If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Did you ever discover something about someone after they were gone that changed how you saw them? I'd love to hear your story, because we're all learning. We're all growing. And sometimes the best lessons come from the people we thought we knew completely. Thank you for listening to my father's story. Thank you for honoring his legacy by hearing it. And if you take nothing else from this, take this. Be kind, even when no one sees, especially when no one sees. Because that's the kindness that changes the world.